Tomorrow, Port Priority 8 will be going down in Seattle, and it is arguably the most important tournament of the entire year. I am quite serious when I say quite literally anybody who's anybody is attending Port 8. But who will actually win Port Priority 8? To figure that out, we'll be going over everything you should know headed into Port 8. Just a reminder before we begin that if you want to support me monetarily, you can do so by using the links to my Patreon and channel memberships in the description below. With that out of the way, let's get started by outlining the structure of today's video. First off, we're going to be going over the top 8 seeds of Port 8, talking about how they're projected to make top 8 and whether or not we think that these players have the potential to underperform or overperform their seeds. After that, we'll be going over some threats just outside the top 8 that you should absolutely be keeping your eyes on headed into Port 8. And lastly, I want to go over sets that have the potential to cause big upsets, but probably won't lead to anyone making top 8. With that out of the way, let's move into the first part of this video. In order to tell you all about the top 8 seeds of Port Priority 8, however, I've brought on a very special guest. Everyone, please welcome to the channel, for the second time, Last, here to tell you all about the top 8 seeds of Port Priority 8.
Thanks, Rister. The top 8 seeds of Port Priority 8 feature several NA competitors as well as Japanese competitors, as well as one European we'll cover in a second. Before that though, let's take a look at these top 8 seeds from the bottom up, starting with the 8th seed. Zomba has been making a case for being the best player in America right now, with a recent top 8 finish at Luminosity Makes Moves Miami 2023 and also a win at Cirque du CFL 2, a tournament where he took victories over both the Buzz and Light. Zomba's bracket path in top 32 includes a projected win over Riddles before he's projected to lose to Akola, before lastly defeating Hurt to make top 8. The big wild card here in his path is, of course, Hurt, who's making his first appearance outside of Japan. In the context of North American competition, Hurt is a large wildcard who has the potential to gatekeep Zomba from top 8. Once in top 8 though, Zomba is projected to lose to Sonics, an understandable loss if that set comes to pass. The 7th seed of Port 8 is Light, whose case for top 8 is a bit more up in the air. Light has had an inconsistent few months, with an amazing 4th place finish at Terra, a 2nd place finish at Rewired Fest, and a win at Shine 2023. But with other placements like 13th at Super Smash Con and a 25th at Luminosity Makes Moves, arguably his worst placement all year. Light's bracket path to make top 8 includes a projected win over Hurt before losing to Mia and defeating Riddles to make top 8, where he's then projected to lose to Tweak. The interesting thing about Light is that he has the potential to both overperform or underperform his seed. This is because Light lost to Apollo Kage at Luminosity Makes Moves Miami very recently. So the projected victory over Hurt in Light's bracket path is up for debate. If he's able to defeat Hurt though, the rest of Light's bracket is actually pretty good. We know that Light is capable of defeating Riddles, and he's currently tied in set count with Tweak, their last encounter at Terra going to Game 5. It's not out of the question for Light to beat Tweak here, and if he does, the question becomes just how far can he go? The 6th seed of the tournament is Tweak, who has missed top 8 at tournaments like Luminosity Makes Moves Miami and SmashCon 2023, but Tweak's 2nd place finish at Terra still lingers in the minds of casual and hardcore watchers alike, as it was a truly phenomenal run. Tweak is seeded to beat MKLeo before losing to Spargo and defeating Shuton to make top 8, where he is then projected to defeat Light before losing to Gluttony for 5th. Tweak losing to Gluttony isn't mind-blowing, as Gluttony defeated him at Terra. Additionally, Tweak defeating MKLeo isn't a stretch either, but it's Tweak's other sets that are more interesting. That's because he's seeded to lose to Spargo. But, as we all remember, Tweak actually defeated Spargo the last time they fought offline, at Terra, with the set going to Game 5. If Tweak can beat Spargo again, he'll make top 8 from winner's side and could avoid fighting Gluto altogether. If Tweak loses to Spargo, there is some debate on whether or not he could defeat Shuton. No matter what though, Tweak versus Spargo will definitely be a very important set, if it ends up happening. The 5th seed of Port Priority 8 is Sonics, a player who has become somewhat infamous for making grand finals versus Spargo at nearly every NA major. Sonics' seeding poses an interesting question when looking at his bracket path though. In top 32, Sonics is seeded to defeat Shuton before losing to Gluttony, and already a lot of people have raised an eyebrow. After all, Shuton plays Aegis, a matchup that notoriously is good against Sonic. But if you don't remember, the last time these two played was Smash Factor X, where Shuton went Olimar versus Sonics. So, while it's up for debate whether or not Sonics will defeat Shuton, the very next set shows that Sonics is projected to lose to Gluttony. But as you likely already know, Sonic is a terrible matchup for Wario, and Gluto has notoriously struggled in the matchup before, nearly losing to Ken at Delfino Massa, who many see as the second best Sonic in comparison to Sonic's. Many would assume that, fighting the better Sonic, there's no way that Gluto defeats Sonic's given the horrid matchup. For now, we'll just have to wait and see whether or not Gluto can pull out the clutch factor on Sonic's like he did against Ken at Delfino Massa. In regards to top 8, Sonic's is seeded to beat MK Leo to make top 8. Not surprising given that Sonic's has defeated Leo the last time they played, before making top 8 and defeating Zomba before losing to Spargo in losers quarters for 5th. However, if Sonic's does indeed beat Gluto, he'd make top 8 from winners and fight Acola, another matchup that is supposedly really good for Sonic. So, while Sonic's is seeded 5th, because of the favorable matchups in his path, Sonic's could realistically make winners finals, where he'd be guaranteed 3rd and fight either Mia or Spargo. The 4th seed of the tournament is Gluttony, and now that we're getting to the higher seeds, you're going to notice some overlap in the discussion points. Like we just talked about, Gluto is seeded to beat Sonic's to make top 8, but given the matchup, he could easily falter here, where Gluto would have to face MK Leo in the loser's top 8 qualifier. A tale as old as time. Assuming Gluto does make top 8 from winners though, he's seeded to lose to Acola, defeat Tweak before matching against Spargo in losers semis. And this is where things could go up in the air, as Gluto defeated Spargo at Terra the last time they fought offline. The main question for Gluttony is whether or not he can bring out the clutch factor in the face of 2 terrible matchups versus Sonic and Steve. And, of course, can Gluto repeat his success from Terra and upset Spargo yet again? Speaking of Spargo, he is our 3rd seed at port priority 8, and while many will undoubtedly raise their eyebrows at Spargo being seated below Acola and Mia, it's important to keep in mind that seeding isn't just who is better than who, but also a tool to avoid repeat matchups and avoid regional conflicts. In reality, the top 3 seeds of port priority 8 could probably go any way between Spargo, Mia, and Acola, but it was likely seeded this way so Mia and Acola wouldn't have to fight until winners finals, if they both win their sets to make it there. This seeding also avoids Sonic's vs Spargo semis if Sonic's ends up upsetting Gluto. So, with that in mind, let's just throw out all semblance of order and cover the top 3 seeds all at once. Spargo is seeded to defeat Ken and Tweak to make top 8, and while it's possible Spargo could lose these, many would consider it unlikely. In top 8, Spargo is seeded to then lose to Mia before defeating Sonic's and Gluto before losing to Mia again in losers finals. This top 8 will be incredibly important for Spargo, as head-to-heads is Spargo's greatest strength and his argument for being the best in the world. If Spargo can keep his dominant head-to-head versus Sonic's and Gluto, he'll cement his place in the top 3 worldwide. The main question in that scenario becomes, will Spargo defeat Mia, and if he does, how does Acola plan to take on Spargo? It's no secret that Spargo has a dominant head-to-head over Acola, but it's been a decent chunk of time since the last time these two fought. In that time, Acola has been sharpening his secondary Aegis, even winning an online tournament using Solo Roy. Right now, it's unclear whether or not Acola will go Steve versus Spargo or not, and ironically enough, Mia may be Acola's only hope at avoiding Spargo altogether. Mia has an 0-2 losing record versus Spargo, but he has always kept the sets close, and the last time they fought was at Kagaribi 10. In that span of time, Mia has leveled up, even defeating Acola to take Kagaribi 11. Spargo has suffered some rough losses this season at Rewired Fest and Terra, and if he hopes to shoot for the number 1 this season, he'll have to take down both Japanese giants at port priority 8. Acola and Mia, as the 1 and 2 seeds respectively, are on a collision course for grand finals. Mia is seeded to beat T and Light to make top 8, while Acola is seeded to beat Ashimo and Zomba, all of these being semi-safe bets. Acola is then projected to defeat Gluto in semis, with Mia projected to beat Spargo, before the two of them meet in winners finals, where Acola is projected to defeat Mia there as well as in grands. The two Japanese giants have been dominating in their home country for months, with the question for them being exactly how dominant they will be. Will Mia end up beating Spargo? What if Acola has to face Sonic's? All exciting possibilities. But for right now, that actually marks the end of my time here. I'm going to be passing the mic back to Rister now. So, see ya.
Thanks, Last. Now that we've gone over the top 8 seeds at length, it's time to go over some threats lurking just beneath the top 8, who all have a good chance at making runs and upsets at port. To start off, I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up that Japan is stupid good at this game. Don't be surprised if any of the Japanese players make big runs to top 8 this weekend. Players like Ken, Shuton, T, or Ashimo are all lurking in the 10 to 20 seeding range, and all of whom could make runs to top 8. The one Japanese player I want to mention specifically though is Hurt. Hurt is the 10th seed and is the 3rd highest seeded Japanese player, second to only Akola and Mia. Or I guess 3rd only to Akola and Mia, and seated above players like Shuton, Ken, and the other players I just mentioned. While many would think this is an overseeding, personally I have faith. After all, not just anyone can take a set off of Akola. However, the most interesting thing about Hurt is that this will be his first time competing in the States at an NA major. Like last mentioned earlier, Hurt is maybe the most important wildcard headed into Port Priority 8, as we have no idea how Hurt will perform. Hurt has the potential to make a big run or get upset. In terms of players to keep your eye on, Hurt is at the top of my list. Also, there are a lot of NA competitors who are in the 10 to 20 seeding range who no one would be surprised if they make a big run. This seeding range has players like MKLeo, Dabuz, Meister, and Mudace, players that could all make a big run, but a big run that wouldn't be a surprise to most people watching. And lastly, let's go over some international talent, other than Japan, who I think you should be keeping your eye on. Firstly, Mexico is making a strong showing at Port 8, with Spargo as the 3rd seed, MKLeo as the 11th, Meister as the 18th, and SkyJ as the 24th. In terms of player to talent ratio, Mexico's might be the highest for Port Priority 8, and no one would be surprised if any of these players make big waves. Going a bit north, Canada's highest seeded representative is Riddles, the 9th seed, who is joined by Big D, the 28th seed, Ouch, the 31st, and Armadillo, the 54th. Out of these players, Riddles has the best chance to make top 8, as Big D has been in a large slump recently. However, we know that Big D is capable of greatness. It's just a question of whether or not he can make a comeback into the limelight. Ouch and Armadillo, while great players, probably couldn't make top 8, but have the potential to make some upsets, as Armadillo has beaten players like Shuton before, so keep your eyes on the Canadian competitors. In terms of Europe, of course, Gluttony is seeded to make top 8 and is the highest seeded European and the only Frenchman in the top 64 seeding. But the second highest seeded European is Spain's very own Siski, who is the 21st seed, and he's joined by fellow Spaniard Andres FN, the 37th seed. Other than them though, the only other Europeans in the top 64 seeding are Quick, the 43rd seed, and Tarek, the 45th, both of whom actually made top 3 at the Port 8 pre-local. Of these two players though, you should be keeping your eye on Tarek, as he's been making big waves at tournaments in NA recently. Lastly, Sonics is the sole representative from the Dominican Republic in the top 64 seeding, who we talked about at length in the top 8 segment. Other than that, the rest of the top 64 seeding consists of just a bunch of Americans and a fair amount of Japanese talent. And since I already mentioned that anyone in Japan can make top 8, the American players I think you should be watching are Pocket, who has the potential to make a big run as long as they can stop playing Fortnite, Lima, coming off a 3rd place finish at Rise and Grind, Shattuck, who's had an amazing last few majors recently, Cola, who is always going to be my GOAT, Apollo Kage, who has a pretty decent bracket path, and lastly H4, who is coming back from an extended stay in Japan. And if we know anything, it's that players who go to Japan and come back undergo a huge level up, and that's just for 1 or 2 tournaments. H4 was gone for a long time. Since that wraps up this segment, let's move on to the last section of today's video, sets that I believe could result in a big upset, but maybe not a big run. Starting in top 32, Apollo Kage has a really good bracket path, going up against Mudace, whom AK brought to Game 5 at LMMM 2023 and has beaten before, into MKLeo, who AK has also defeated before. Next up is Lima, who, as long as they can beat Shattuck, has to go up against Dabuz, who Lima has defeated before at Rise and Grind 2023. And lastly, Neo has a good chance to defeat Karama given the matchup, where I think Neo has a strong chance to beat Riddles. Looking at top 128, we've got Riddles versus SkyJ, and given their extensive set history, I think SkyJ has a good chance to make this upset. The loser of this set though has to fight Geist, who I actually think has a good chance to defeat Riddles or SkyJ. And lastly for this pool, Aaron is seeded to lose to Umeki, but given the fact that Aaron has defeated Mudace recently, Aaron has a big chance to make this upset. The second pool of top 128 doesn't have much other than the fact that Gact could very realistically upset Ouch. But if he doesn't, I think Ouch could actually get a win over Mia, given how uncommon Wolf is in Japan. You might think I'm crazy for thinking that Ouch could beat Mia, but guys, come on, see the vision with me. How cool would that be? It's also worth noting that Shattuck is seeded to lose to Light, but I could easily see Shattuck making this upset. The third pool of top 128 sees Tweak seeded to beat Kananabe and MKLeo seeded to beat Yara. I could see either of these players making the upset, as Yara has beaten Spargo before, so beating Leo wouldn't be out of the question. And while Tweak's got a pretty even set history with Light, it's still supposed to be a bad matchup for Diddy, and if Tweak gets too comfortable and underestimates Kananabe, then there's huge potential for an upset here. Deathspade is seeded to lose to MVD, but given the fact that Deathspade has beaten Apollo Kage multiple times, I think this upset is very likely to happen. If it happens, he'd have to face Armadillo, where Deathspade may go Sora instead of Bayo given the matchup. At that point, it's just a question of whether or not Deathspade can defeat Kurama. Shu is seeded to lose to Base Mage, but if she can make that upset, I have faith that Shu could defeat Neo to make top 32. And lastly, call me crazy, but Send has the potential to defeat Yara given the matchup, and Anathema could very well defeat Kananabe given how volatile that matchup is. The last pool of top 128 sees Cola and Japanese player Alice fight in the Roy Ditto, a set that I will riot if it's not streamed. Alice has a huge potential to make the upset here given that it's a Ditto, but if Cola does win this set, I think Cola could actually upset Gluttony, as crazy as that seems. Lastly, Andres FN is seeded to lose to Big D, a set I could easily see him winning, and Tarek is seeded to lose to Siski, a set I could easily see Tarek winning. That'll wrap up our last section for today's video. Port Priority 8 is going to be, debatably, the most important tournament for the entire year. It'll definitely be the largest and most important tournament of this season though, and the head-to-heads and placements will go a long way to determine rankings. However, if there's one thing that we know better than anything else, it's that seeding rarely goes as planned. There will no doubt be tons of upsets, runs, and unknown names breaking out at Port Priority 8. And no matter what, I will be there to cover it all right here on this channel. If you're excited for that, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the videos I'll make on it. But for now, that's going to be it for today's video. Before I go, shout out to my patrons, that's Laster, Fazco333, and my tier 2 patrons, Iltis and Diamond Blaze. Additionally, shout out my YouTube members Stormtrooper, Loco Soko, Mattoon, Diarrhea, Dicho Jr., Defective, Neo, and my tier 2 members Mike G and Wu-Tang Forever. Tomorrow, I'll be covering the tournament Cumbre 2, but until then, I've been Mr. Mice, and thank you all so much for watching.